Hey everyone, Rob B here with Rob D, and you are listening to the market update version of the Property Podcast. Yes, it's the time of the month where we bring you up to speed with everything that is happening in the property market and beyond that's going to be useful. In this episode, we reveal the fastest growing city in the UK, big news around mortgage stress tests, and some shocking social media advice.
Welcome to the Property Podcast. This is the show where we take some time out from our day job of advising a multi-million-pound property fund, which you can find out more about at portfolio.co.uk, and share the lessons that we've learned along the way for free. Today, loads of news to get through. It's been a busy month, but we're always sharing lots of news on every episode of the Property Podcast. So before we go any further, make sure you are following. On Apple Podcasts, you can hit the little plus button. On Spotify, you can hit follow, and you'll make sure that every episode gets downloaded directly to your device. And of course, it's completely free.
Now, this is the market update. You are in the right place for that. But before we get going, let's remind you that of our other podcast, Ask Rob and Rob, and we love getting your questions in. So if you're stuck on a deal and you need a bit of a helping hand, or you're nervous about the market and you want to know what steps to be taking next, or your progress has come to a bit of a halt and you just can't seem to get going, anything like that or more, we're happy to help. So get your questions in over at propertyhub.net/ask.
All right, let's get into our market update. Loads to cover, as always. It's amazing how much happens in a month. And we're going to be talking about the rentals, the mortgages, politics, TikTok, and a whole lot more. But we always like to start with a topic that's never far from dinner party conversation, which is property prices. And we'll start with a piece from the Evening Standard that says house prices are rising at their fastest rate since 2004, says Halifax. This is the latest set of Halifax data that says that the annual growth rate for property has hit 13%. The highest since 2004, and the slowest growing region is London, but even that has put on 7.1%. Rob, it feels like we've done a variation of this kind of story every month on Market Update this year because property prices always seem to be hitting new highs.
Yes, that is a bit of a constant in the market updates at the moment. And will it slow down? Will it charge ahead? Or will it crash? Well, of course, we'll keep you updated on that as well. But what is news and what is interesting is a piece from Savills, who are seeing that the fastest growth now is coming for the first time since December 2020 from the urban markets, so major towns and cities are now outperforming the regions, so the smaller towns and villages around these major towns and cities. And this is a real change because when we had the pandemic, and understandably, people were saying, oh, well, that's it. It's all about moving out the cities now and cities are dead and all the rest of it. And Rob quite strongly said, no, that's not the case. And they put a good argument around that, and it seems that good old Mr. D's been correct because not only have towns and cities done well since all the lockdowns have ended and bounced back strongly, but now they are the strongest performing markets, which is remarkable. Lockdowns weren't that long ago, but yet already the urban markets are performing very strongly.
Yes, and elsewhere in that data, also showing that the rate of price growth for houses and flats is now the same. And for a long time, houses were outperforming flats, very much linked to the same point. People wanting to be further out, people wanting more space. And now that's come back into alignment as well, which is very interesting. So growth everywhere, record growth according to Halifax. The question on everyone's mind is, well, how long can this continue for? And there is a story here from Mortgage Strategy that suggests that the cooling may be beginning. The headline is viewings per property fall by 29% in June. And this is data collected by Property Mark, which represents estate agents that surveyed them. And it says basically the amount of viewings has decreased by a third, which is a lot, but it's decreased back to where you'd expect it to be at this time of year. So there has, of course, been absolute mania in some parts of the market, not a lot of stock, lots of competition for viewings. And this is a sign, just one at the moment, that things might be starting to return to something more normal again. Rob, we can't make too many conclusions based off one story, but viewings, of course, are a leading indicator of what might be happening in the market later.
Yes, absolutely. And we've got our hands on some more information and some more data that's really interesting, which we'll put together in a podcast in the next week or two. As a podcast listener, we like to give you those unfair advantages. So make sure you're quick to listen over the next couple of Thursdays because we've got some interesting news and information coming your way. So there's news on rents now, and there's two what appear at first to be conflicting news stories. So the first one is from the Office for National Statistics, which has reported that rents over the last 12 months are up by 3%. And that seems perfectly fine and normal until you read the next article from The Guardian, which has the headline, "Private rents in the UK reach record highs with 20% rises in Manchester." And it's not just Manchester flying high, London has seen rents up by 15.8%. So Rob, what's going on here? We've got the Office for National Statistics telling us that it's just up by 3%, which seems quite low. And then you've got The Guardian telling us they're up by 15 to 20%, depends on where you're looking, which seems really, really high. So where's the truth? What's the actual?
Well, actually, both are true. It's just that they're measuring slightly different things. So the ONS is sampling all rents across the country, whether these properties have been newly let or whether people have been living there for years. So obviously, not all landlords are jacking up the rent all over the place. Lots of landlords just kind of leave the rent where it is if they've got good tenants, or they increase it slightly each year. So you wouldn't expect any giant jumps. And 3% in that context is not that surprising. What the Rightmove data reported in The Guardian is talking about is asking rents. So it's looking purely at the increase in rents for properties that are being marketed to rent now. And those are showing big increases. So what that implies is that tenancies that have come to an end or properties that are new to the market, landlords are looking at what the market will bear, realising it's actually quite a bit higher and asking for a higher rent than they were. So to me, I would say that that's probably an indicator when that feeds through into the market, that will increase the data that the ONS is reporting on. And so we will see that 3% rise across the country that they talk about increasing in the coming, say, 6 months or so. It's also possible that the type of property is affecting this data. I don't think they make any adjustments for that. So Manchester is leading the way, but it could be that a lot of new, very swanky apartments have recently come onto the market in Manchester, which naturally command higher rents, which therefore pulls the average up. I don't know if that's the case, but it's possible. So it's always important to be a little bit cautious with data and understand what's going on under the hood. But we do know from our experience that Manchester is flying, and so it probably is the case that rents are rising faster there than anywhere else.
Linked to that is a story from Letting Agent Today, which has reported that for the first 6 months of the year, London has seen 171% more inquiries than the same point at 2019, pre-COVID. Now, when I saw the headline, I thought, oh, well, it'll be compared to COVID. But then when you read not too much further into the article, it says 2019. So that makes this even more remarkable for me. That is unbelievable level of interest in the rental market. I mean, where is everyone coming from? That is absolutely huge. So it's no surprise to see that with that such strong demand, that rents are up nearly 16% in London. And I'm sure, although this article doesn't report on it, that Manchester must be very, very similar. So as we've said more than once now, it's not just cities bouncing back from a pandemic low. They've bounced back and then started to charge ahead. It's an absolutely remarkable success story.
Yeah, exactly right. And what this story is saying as well is that more tenants are choosing to extend their tenancy in London than usual because the market is so competitive. They know that they might struggle to find something else or maybe find something else at the same price. And it's just really hard to get your hands on any kind of property in London. And that bears out what I've noticed from just keeping an eye on the market. So for any London landlords, great news because your rents are going up and you'll probably find it easier to keep hold of your tenants as well.
Moving on to mortgages now, we've previously reported on that the mortgage affordability test for residential mortgages is being scrapped, and that officially was scrapped on Monday just gone. Previously, lenders were forced to calculate whether borrowers would be able to cope if interest rates climbed up to 3%. They no longer have to. Now, it's not expected to shake things up instantly. A lot of lenders aren't planning to change anything immediately, but now they're able to change things. At some point, competition will probably force them, almost certainly force them, to adapt those measures and loosen their criteria. And it's happened with residential mortgages. It's going to be interesting to see if this happens for buy-to-let as well, because there are stress tests at play there also. They haven't been removed yet. But now the stress tests have been removed from residential, I wouldn't be surprised to see it happening with buy-to-let in the not-too-distant future as well. All these stress tests were brought in to make sure we don't have a repeat of the '08 crash. And as we head into a boom, it seems like a great time to remove them. Well, no, probably not. But we don't seem to learn the lessons. We are far, far away from the mania of what took us into '08 last time, a long, long away. 1 year of strong property prices does not create a unsustainable boom, but it's measures like this that might lead to that place.
Let's move on to a few political stories, because there's quite a bit of that around this month. The first one is from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, which is a leading charity, which has put out a report that I think if I were to sum it up, I'd say is not a fan of the private rented sector. In fact, it's explicitly calling for policies to shrink the private rented sector. What it's saying is that it's not acceptable to have a situation where a large proportion of the population is renting. And so they're keen to find ways of getting more people into home ownership and shared ownership and things like that. And they also want to grow the social rented sector. So I've had a skim of the report. It's interesting. There's some parts that I agree with. There's other parts which seem to be pretty ideological, and I'm not sure that there's really particularly a lot of evidence to back them up. Maybe we'll do another piece on this in the future, but certainly not one to read as a landlord if you've got a fragile ego.
News on holiday lets now, and licensing news. And two stories. One, Scotland has announced that all holiday lets will need a licence by July 2024. So you've got a little bit of time, but it is coming. And Wales is following suit. The press release from the Welsh government hasn't put a date on when that will be starting, but it looks like it won't be just licensing that's coming to Wales. They've also suggested that they're going to look at a range of planning, taxation and property levers to tackle the issue of second and unaffordable homes. It's a real delicate one, holiday lets, because there are fantastic operators out there and there are areas that do need holiday lets. But it does feel like in certain areas that it has gone too far and some regulation is needed. It's a real difficult balance, and I don't claim to have the answer here on the Property Podcast, because I think there's a place for that market, but I also think it can go too far, like any market can, particularly if people are financially incentivized to enter that market. So it's going to be interesting to see what Wales does here, and we will keep you updated, because licensing is one thing, but planning and taxation rules are another. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see what Wales do. And then if England, Scotland and Northern Ireland follow, we will, of course, keep you updated.
Okay, let's move on to a couple of other miscellaneous stories that have caught our eye. And firstly, there's one from Mortgage Strategy with the headline, "A third of house sales fall through with £2,000 worth of costs." Yes, this is the story that 1 in 3 home purchases fell through over the last year, which isn't great, is it? But it gets worse. Of the 2/3 that actually made it through, the average length of time it takes to complete a sale has increased by a quarter. It now takes 153 days. And a quick bit of maths tells me that's over 5 months. 5 months to get a property transaction through. We've talked a lot on the podcast before about how bonkers the system for transacting in property is, and you couldn't really get a better illustration of it than that data.
No, it just seems to get worse. Unfortunately, it's not improving at all. And lockdowns are behind us now. So it's not like we can even say, oh, well, it's because of lockdowns. People are back to work. The industry is back up and running, but yet it seems to get worse. With so many transactions falling over, it's so easy to understand why people just give up on property. Because you could be trying to invest for more than 12 months and still not have gone anywhere. If you find a deal, do all your research, go into a transaction, and then it falls over after 5 months, and you then have to start another one. And with the market moving up at the rate it is, it's going to be leaving a lot of people stressed. And that applies to both owner-occupiers and investors. So the property sector is archaic. We know that. We've talked about it so much, and we're trying to shake it up, doing our own thing with portfolio. But if someone else can come along and sort out transactions, we'd be very, very grateful. There is good news though, Rob. It seems that there are no or very few rogue landlords. So all that bad press on rogue landlords and landlords being evil seems to be false. Because according to Landlord Today, a Freedom of Information request by a newspaper unveiled that just 56 property agents and landlords have been entered onto the government's so-called rogue landlord banned list since April 2018. So we're all doing a great job. Or it could be that the councils actually haven't bothered using that list and therefore it's kind of just being a wasted tool. Who knows? I'm going for the positive, and it's just that there's a lot of great landlords out there.
Well, I do think it's actually both. We saw in the recent white paper on the fairer private rented sector that it's actually like such a tiny percentage of landlords that weren't just like, not doing a brilliant job, but were actually like outright criminal. They're so tiny they didn't even bother to put a percentage on it. So obviously those cases do get a lot of headlines, but they are relatively few and far between. But I would say that there are probably more than 56 cases over the last few years. And enforcement is a major problem. And this is another theme that we see. There's always more and more layers of legislation coming in, but it's hard to see what the point of it is because local authorities just don't have the resources or the ability to enforce the rules that are already in place. And this story is the perfect illustration of that. Rob, we're coming towards the end and I feel like we're at risk of ending on a downer. Have you got any other stories to cheer us up a bit?
Well, unfortunately not, Rob. I've got a bit of a shocker. And if everybody can prepare themselves for this and sit down. But it turns out that not all property advice given on TikTok is accurate.
Never. I'm planning to be financially free by tomorrow.
Well, I'd swipe on to somebody dancing instead because you're probably better off taking advice from that person. And this news story comes at us after an online mortgage advisor has analysed videos from TikTok and has discovered shockingly that a lot of advice from those influencers on TikTok is not good advice or appropriate warnings were not given. Rob, I'm quite shocked by this one. I don't use TikTok. I don't have TikTok. But I'm stunned that a platform of this size with apparently so many good dance moves involved and so many trends and memes. I have no idea. I'm just saying words now. But things that sound cool and the property advice on there is not very good.
Well, I am shocked to my very core. To be fair to TikTokers, the mainstream media is wrong about property most of the time as well. And it's far less entertaining. So there you go. That links us on nicely to this week's Hub Extra, the part of the show where we leave you with a tool, a resource, or sometimes just something entertaining that we've come across. And that is what this week's Hub Extra is. Mike Winnett, who's been on this show before and has got a really, really funny YouTube channel, put out a video recently about entrepreneurs on TikTok, where he sits there for, I think it's like 4 hours, just watching TikToks and looking at some of the questionable claims that people come up with on there. As with all his stuff, it is really, really funny and strongly recommend you give it a watch. So we'll make sure we link to that one in this week's show notes.
Well, that's us done for another week. Remember, every Tuesday we have Ask Rob and Rob, so make sure you get your questions in for that at propertyhub.net/ask. And you could hear your question being answered maybe even this Tuesday. So make sure you join us for that. And of course, we'll be back for the main event, the Property Podcast, on Thursday. So until then, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.